questions. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. When did the government learn about the servers who lost their jobs because of the abuse of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program in Weyburn? That's an interesting answer that the Premier provides, because Sandy Nelson and Shauna Jennison-Young lost their jobs last month and were replaced by temporary foreign workers. Sandy and Shauna contacted the Ministry of Labour about this on April 7th. And they spoke, Mr. Speaker, with the Minister of Health, the member from Weyburn, on April 11th. Right. So well before, Mr. Speaker, the story broke in the news, before it was in the media coverage, this government was notified about this, Mr. Speaker. They were notified about specific abuse in the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, about Canadian citizens, about Saskatchewan residents losing their jobs and being replaced by temporary foreign workers. Under this government, Mr. Speaker, there has been a 300% increase in the number of temporary foreign workers in Saskatchewan. A 300% increase. There are nearly 12,000 temporary foreign workers in our province now. What concerned people in Saskatchewan are advocating for is that temporary foreign workers not be exploited and that Canadians are not passed over for jobs, Mr. Speaker. That Canadians aren't filling jobs, that temporary foreign workers are not filling jobs that Canadians should and could be filling. Like this government used temporary foreign workers, Mr. Speaker, for a cashier position at a liquor board store.
Right. This government has continually refused to focus on the basics, the things that really matter to success for students, things like overcrowded classrooms, schools that desperately need repairs, and students that aren't getting the one-on-one attention they need. So it's no wonder why elected school board trustees, who are desperately trying to focus on what matters to students, are incredibly frustrated by this government's Lean Initiative clawback. So to the Premier, why on earth hasn't he reversed this Lean Initiative clawback yet, and why is he dismissing the concerns of the elected school board leaders across this province?
The government finally acknowledged last week that its first redesign of the Children's Hospital was flawed. The first redesign occurred when the government brought in its high-priced lean consultant, John Black, to shrink the Children's Hospital. This government ignored concerns from frontline healthcare workers who were adamant that the proposed hospital was too small. And when we asked questions about this in the fall, the government scoffed. But now the government is scrambling to re-expand the design. To the Minister, how did the lean consultants and the government get their first redesign of the Children's Hospital so wrong? Why didn't he listen to the frontline workers, the real experts, instead of listening to John Black?
A new report out from Environment Canada last week reconfirms that Saskatchewan's greenhouse gas emissions are still going the wrong direction. When we asked the government in committee to reveal its climate change plan, the minister couldn't do so. He seems to hope that public awareness is all that is needed to reach his promised reduction goal of 20 million megatons of pollution. But this government has slashed green spending in the budget, it's cut climate change funding by 82%, and it has refused to implement its own carbon levy through the Technology Fund, despite promising to do so since 2009, and despite paying a consultant to put together a business plan for it. The minister has finally admitted he's not optimistic about his government's plan. To the minister, the public deserves to know, will this minister come clean and tell us what his real emission targets are?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dr. Jim Miller, a highly respected and award-winning historian at the University of Saskatchewan, says TransformUS is the, quote, biggest disaster that's happened to the University of Saskatchewan apart from the Great Depression in the 1930s, end quote. But it's not just Dr. Miller who's raising concerns. Right. Dr. Eric Howe was actually on the TransformUS academic task force because he wanted to be part of it to help make the process work. But he resigned last October, Mr. Speaker, because it was clear to him that the process was incredibly flawed and it would lead to disastrous outcomes for the university and for our province. Dr. Howe says this, quote, at the conclusion of TransformUS, with the U of S no longer responding to the urgent social needs of the province, having eliminated its elite boutique programs, having transferred away or gutted many of its colleges, it would be appropriate to rename the U of S to Meewasin Valley Community College would seem to be appropriate, end quote. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, when we hear such serious concerns from respected academics at the university, how can this government not be concerned about what is happening through TransformUS at our province's largest university?
John Boxall was killed in a car accident on February 20th, 2013. The driver of the other vehicle had a blood alcohol level that was well above 1.08. But the Crown stayed the impaired driving charge. Instead, that driver was convicted of criminal negligence causing death. Because the driver was not technically convicted of an alcohol-related charge, John Boxall family are not able to receive compensation for pain and suffering under the Fatal Accident Act. That isn't fair, and it needs to be made right. SGI has discretion on these matters, but Rosemary Boxall had written to the opposition because she hadn't been getting the help from the government. In fact, she said, quote, "Hopefully you have better luck with SGI because I'm not. I get worse news from them every time I talk to them," end quote. To the minister, will she commit today to make this right and to finally treat Rosemary and her family with fairness and decency?
We're hearing from frontline highways workers, too, who tell us that the team of managers and consultants as large as 20 people have shown up at highway shops. It seemed like their goal was to lean the shop by throwing stuff out. For example, one highways workplace with several workers maintaining multiple vehicles was left with one set of standard wrenches and one set of metric wrenches. All other wrenches went in the trash, along with valuable supplies like hydraulic cylinders. To the Minister of Lean, is restricting multiple workers to one set of tools while filling up garbage bins with tools and valuable equipment this government's idea of Saskatchewan common sense?
It's evident that this government, that minister, that premier are unwilling to listen to school board leaders across this province, to teachers, to parents that are sharing significant concerns. And, for the minister to brush off and boast about a record that's a poor one once again here today, instead of standing up and bringing forward actions to address the problems, is really weak. The government, though, can take some very important steps here today. They could take two steps here today. They could scrap the Lean Initiative clawback, and they could take the $5 million that minister, that government earmarked for standardized testing, and they could redeploy those to the front lines of education to enable student success. To the minister, will he take those steps here today?
Mr. Speaker, this government spends $40 million on a U.S. consultant, Japanese senseis $3,500 a day, and their best go-to line for the defense of Lean, the need to spend that amount of money, Mr. Speaker, is because they had to clear out Christmas trees from the basement, Mr. Speaker. Now, John Black and Associates has a list of basic criteria for contracting. It says, quote, "The following criteria must be met for all consulting contracts," end quote. Now, Mr. Speaker, on the list of requirements from John Black, I don't see Christmas tree disposal on the item, so perhaps that was an add-on from the $40 million contract. Perhaps that was one that the senseis came up with. I don't know, Mr. Speaker. But the list of basic mandatory criteria does say this, quote, "Add no people, no space, no new equipment, and spend no money," end quote. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, does the government actually have John Black giving approval for new staff and new equipment, and is that why it's been so difficult for this government to actually fix the basics in healthcare and in seniors' care? The mandatory list of criteria that must be met for all consulting contracts for John Black, that's the $40 million U.S. consultant, it's a lengthy list. The mandatory criteria list also includes this, quote, "Develop and implement a lean training matrix. Will include top leadership participation in Japan training led by master senseis who were students of Taiichi Ono," end quote. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, how many top lean leaders will be traveling to Japan to take training from the master senseis who studied under Taiichi Ono, or are these the $3,500 per day Japanese senseis that this government is repeatedly flying from Japan to Saskatchewan instead?
This government has not been forthcoming with how much in total its Lean Pet project is costing Saskatchewan. Surely that is something Saskatchewan people deserve to know. So to the Minister of Lean, what's the answer? Mr. Speaker, we've heard the spin, but what is the sum total? Can the Minister answer that for the people of Saskatchewan?
Yesterday, we learned that the number of seniors having to use the food bank here in Regina has increased by 24% just over last year. To the Minister of Social Services, how can she explain why the number of seniors accessing the food bank here in our capital city has jumped by 24% in just the last year? under this government's watch, 3,000 seniors have been thrown off the senior income plan, and she knows that. In cold comfort to seniors who have to go to a food bank. Right. 24% increase in the number of seniors in the last year. In the last year. But we also know that there's an alarming increase in the number of homeless seniors seeking emergency shelter in Saskatchewan, in Regina. And the director of the Salvation Army Waterson Centre says this alarming increase is linked to rising rental and utility rates. My question to the minister, is the government paying attention to this? Is it concerned? And when will it actually do something to help seniors who are living in poverty? You know, Mr. Speaker, the member's opposite can cheer while the minister recites stats. But what are the people on the front lines who are helping seniors every day saying? What are those people saying? They're seeing a 24% increase. And this is what the Regina Food Bank CEO has to say. And I quote, and he's a frontline worker. He's not regurgitating the stats. He's saying what we're starting to see now is people that would never have thought they would have to entertain the idea of reaching out for some support through the food bank. And they laugh over there. The director of the emergency shelter says this, quote, the seniors that we've seen come to the shelter have been folks that have lived comfortable lives, and because of their financial instability that they face, they've not been able to maintain that standard of living. End of quote. To the minister, will she just admit that Saskatchewan needs a comprehensive anti-poverty strategy?
When we brought forward concerns we've been hearing from professors and students about TransformUS and its long-term ramifications for the university, the minister said that everything is fine and that he has full confidence in the TransformUS process. My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Premier. Does he share this lack of concern? One of the big concerns is about the elimination of jobs, Mr. Speaker, and we've already seen the elimination of 248 jobs on campus. And yesterday we learned that there will be even more cuts. And what I've heard from deans, what I've heard from student leaders is that this cannot be rushed. My question is to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. Will he ensure that proper scrutiny occurs and major decisions that have long-term ramifications for the university for decades to come, Mr. Speaker, will not be rushed through?
Mr. Speaker, this government is once again not listening to the people of Prince Albert about highway safety concerns. We've been hearing that highway number 2 north of Prince Albert has a number of safety issues. Community members are saying traffic on number 2 north is too heavy, turning is hazardous, and it's getting dangerous to share the road with speeding semis on a stretch of highway with so few turning lanes and shoulders. So, Mr. Speaker, when community members who use the Red Wing intersection reached out to the local MLAs, they felt that their valid concerns were dismissed. The people of Prince Albert are feeling deserted by this government. The Prince Albert MLAs campaigned for a second bridge. Now they sit silently and look on as the people that they represent get more and more frustrated with answers like that, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, in the dark, cold days of January, the government again increased fees for camping. And later this month, Saskatchewan families will start paying a much higher price. The new fees for camping have made a weekend camping trip an expensive event, Mr. Speaker, and may discourage people from checking out our beautiful parks and lakes. That new $9 fee is equivalent to a pack of wieners, a pack of buns, and a bag of marshmallows. This government is sitting on its hands while the cost of living, the cost of having a nice family camping trip are skyrocketing. To the minister, why would the government let camp fees skyrocket, bungle up its online booking system after it leaned it and privatized it, and then tell campers they just weren't appreciating the value of the campsites?
A very conservative calculation of the cost to taxpayers of this government's lean pet project based on the incomplete information provided so far. The amount is somewhere near around $100 million, Mr. Speaker. And the meter keeps running each and every day, and we hear about more millions in costs. So the minister could clear up the uncertainty around the total figure if she would stand in the House and answer the question today. Again, to the minister, what is the total cost for the lean pet project? Taxpayers have a right to the truth and to the whole picture. To the minister, why won't she answer that question? If she doesn't know is it because she doesn't know the answer or because she doesn't want taxpayers to know the answer? Why won't they table the answers to the written questions? Why won't they come clean?